This evening, we need to review what we've done in the past quickly and decide how we want to proceed for this year. And I believe Jordan has made a copy of our report from last year and can distribute that. It was constructed in such a way that we made observations and then we made recommendations. And we can first decide whether that's the similar format we want to follow this year, or we want to adopt a different format. And then we need to hopefully leave this evening with kind of divvying up responsibilities and how we will draft the report. In previous years, in the last year, we broke off the teams and to construct the observations, and we Lisa compiled them on a was it a Word document or some kind of a document that allowed us to comment on one another's observations and drafts and make suggestions or revisions, and we were all able to view those, and then we met and made decisions as to what was in, what was out, and what's our consensus report, and who would be responsible for presenting it at the board meeting. I'm open to discussion on the format that was followed last year's report and see what you feel.
Does anybody want a hard copy of the report last year?
Did you already print it?
What's that?
Did you already print it?
We did.
Then yes.
I would, since I didn't bring it.
I'll never think about being
We don't.
extensive.
We usually answer.
I know. It's already printed, so.
You're all here, why not?
Yeah. I just wanted to figure out if I take notes, but yeah.
That's really responsible.
I have a question. I noticed something that was pretty interesting. So this was drafted last year, but if you turn to page 4, number 7, it talks about the MAPS assessment. And it talks about how a member's different of opinions on the frequency of MAPS. I just thought that was interesting because I'm like advocating against MAPS, and so it was another person that wasn't for MAPS last year.
Yeah. I think
Yes,
we
that
should-
was
Who
right.
was that?
Renee.
Oh, okay.
I think it was just, I think it's always like, I think last year we really, I think, took the time to represent different viewpoints, and we thought it was really important to express that.
Okay.
And it could be the same this year. This is just kind of a straw, and, we built on from the previous year, and there were some things that applied and some things that don't. I also think we could, as we talk about the format and how we're going to divide things up, people have had a little bit of time to go through the budget. So maybe at some point tonight, we can just go around and see kind of initial reactions, or like try to come up with themes or things that people felt were important to highlight. But again, we can do that at some point tonight. But I do think like getting people's first reactions is probably a good way to figure out, okay, how can we either team up or divide up and so from there.
So is there an overall impression one way or the other as to whether this is a good format to follow, or suggestions as to how it might be modified or changed or sacked and choose something?
Has everyone had time to actually read all of the observations and recommendations from last year? It's been a long
I think my recommendations would be like in terms of like how you present that, maybe in a way that's easier to scan for someone who wants to get a quick minute, but they're all by structures and sensible to me. Makes sense?
So maybe like an overview, like on the first page and then getting into the.
Yeah, there's some things you can do in order to just make it easier. Also, like interpret bullet points to text and sort of like what it takes up front, what this is about. Just to get some people wanna look about math, we can easily see where the math is. And you can also do some sort of like a one paragraph.
I can tell you one observation I can make that this is 7 pages in length. When I first joined the committee, the chair insisted it'd be 1 page, so it's evolved and I think for the better. Because I think our role as community members, we used to refer to ourselves as citizens, but that's been chucked. And our role is to comment and evaluate, and to do in a abbreviated fashion was very difficult.
Okay, so can you reiterate the suggestions again? For what format was the?
So I think one is to kind of follow what we have here with potentially some kind of summary statement on each of our numbering bullet points. So maybe we just have like a highlighted what it is, and then we can expand on it in the paragraph. But I think if everybody's, maybe one, we're fighting against time. So it's like, okay, does this format work? And then we can figure out, okay, what are the things we want to focus on and emphasize to the board? So I think it would be, are you okay with the format, or do we see it as being something slightly different of what's presented?
Well, I would recommend that we remove the maps language because it doesn't align with the board goals.
So that's a content question. Right?
I'm sorry?
That's a content question.
We're asking about the format first.
Oh, okay. So say it again, what's the?
Do you wish to follow a similar format? In other words, compile a group of observations and then recommendations, or do you wish a different format?
Okay, yeah, we can keep this for you.
So we do.
I wonder if, just to throw it out there, would it make it clear if we had observations specific to each of the 4 board goals and then recommendations? And then that we could even maybe divide up the work by the 4 goals, for observation.
Yeah, I like that idea too, because as I was going through the budget, I kept thinking, okay, here's the goal. How do I follow the goal to the budget? What's in there? So I like that idea.
I support that as well. I think that makes for good alignment and easy reading, frankly.
I agree.
Well, let me ask a question. We all engaged in as did the board, asking questions, and we got answers, and they were compiled and put in a long document that used the sheets formula in Google, some of the responses to those questions linger because they were inadequately answered, or they were answered, and maybe we might differ with the answer that was given, or they weren't answered at all. And at some point, I would think that it might be appropriate that notwithstanding that they may not specifically address one of the board goals, that the comment might be made on on that. As Mariah and I, at our last meeting commented, for example, one of my concerns is we have what I call a ticking time bomb when we have a growing deferred maintenance budget calculation that was 600,000 or 600 million last year. And this year it's in excess of $1 billion. And if we're moving in a single budget year of 400 million accumulating total, what is the board's long range strategic plan on addressing these things? You're already the size of pre-existing bond measures just for deferred maintenance, and you still have 2 high schools yet to be remodeled. So I believe a comment along those lines is appropriate somewhere. I concur that our report might be tailored in such a way that we're addressing the board goals first, but I'd like for us to address those areas which were on that questionnaire that maybe we felt were not adequately answered. For example, Stephen Carranton might wish to pursue the MAPS questions in more detail than what was responded to by Dr. Adams.
So maybe we have a category like applies to all or overriding
Yeah.
all.
Can I ask you, that makes no sense. Can I ask you, so how did you give me this up last time? How did you kind of create different areas?
Break up the word.
What was just some sort of like the way you approach it?
I wasn't on it last year. I don't know.
So
Well,
we
I
kind
think
of
Lisa
look at,
can
if
answer
you
that.
look at the previous years and kind of divided it up on kind of interest area and what people felt I guess it would be like interest areas and things that people felt they had knowledge in and could take that issue on. And so that's kind of how we divided it. And that, I mean, honestly, it was 4 people.
Yeah.
And so it was 4 people.
Oh, so it makes it easy to divide it up.
Yes, and then it was a lot of work, but we came up with the timeline and when people had to get in it, and I just we all pulled it together, made some edits, and then everybody kind of agreed to the final, what it looked like. So this year we could do it differently. If we decide we're doing like board goals, then maybe it's someone take each of the
So-
goals and then someone take kind of overriding issues and then someone, I'm happy to kind of write the kind of the narrative leading up to those and helping edit in the end. If we want to do it that way.
Right, so I looked through the goals and what Richard said applies to that, but it's I think more general, right? So it's like some of us, there's some overlap. You can think about like some of these things might overlap, right? So it's like professional excellence, support, and racial equity and social justice overlap, obviously. Because if
Kind
you
of
have better
override,
workforce,
yes,
but
right.
and so it's like if you divide it up by goals to an annual budget, it might be more difficult, right? So I'm wondering whether that's something that we should consider when we put things together, but we should first start by compiling content and then figure out how we want to present the content instead of using that framework in order to clarify things up.
Right, so maybe part of that could be we go around the room, like, and
Just see,
figure
like,
out what were things that stress people in the document, or what do you have concerns about, and how do we address them in there? I think if we just kind of agree, okay, we'll have this tentative structure, but we can adjust it.
Yeah.
I mean, we basically have a week, so that's good. Like, if we can kind of focus in on the content like you're talking about, then we can kind of figure out, okay, what makes the most sense of how we lay this out. I agree with you that it's not going to fit perfectly, and there are issues like maintenance or some of the equity that are overriding that affect all of them.
Mhm.
I mean, we had one about I think we had one highlighting just like the importance of nutrition and access to food, and that it wasn't necessarily, it was just how important that is to all students in the learning. And I think maintenance was another one of, and creating safe environments for students, that's kind of been overriding too. So I think we'll get there.
It feels kind of like a couple of different things. One, last year it was people paired up together on a lot of the sections, or they worked on them together. So I guess this year, one of the questions is, do you all want to just have your own observations individually, your own recommendations, put them in here and then review them together? Or would you like to pair up within themes or board goals? You could do it that way. Yeah, thinking about only having a week to get through it.
Yes, so thinking that we only have a week, I really think it's critical that we try to determine what our assignments are. And by Thursday, have a rough draft ready for review. And because the boat's got to get put in the water if we're going to make a report. And if the board indeed is going to be diligent about reviewing its packet and it's we submit our report on the 2nd of May, so they have it in hand for the May 9th meeting. When the board chair says, don't read it to us, and well, because we've already read it, maybe I'll come back with well, then you're ready to respond to some questions then. So anyway, I personally would be happy to work on responding to questions that were answered inadequately and are dealing with that portion of the report, and let the rest of you cut your teeth on the board goals and that kind of stuff. And,
That seems, as a new person on the committee, it seems manageable for me to see like, okay, as a second grade teacher, I would probably want to focus on the 3rd grade reading goal.
sure.
Feel like I can dive into that
Sure.
focus.
When you all come with such different expertise and background, yeah, it'd be helpful. And there's enough of you.
And Steve, this isn't quite like doing an audit where you get to run tests and then make determinations and so on. But I'm not dictating how you would review a budget, but it's a little different than what I understand an auditor does.
Yeah, I don't know what an auditor does.
Oh.
I can tell you, and it's not
Well,
fun.
my brother-in-law was a partner in Grant Thornton, and that's all they did seem like.
I mean,
That and IPOs.
Right. Yeah, I think even if people pick some areas that they want to focus on, all of us have a chance to review and discuss. And so I think that's important to remember too, that we all have input. And so maybe as we kind of talk about this, and I'm kind of outlining, okay, the timeline, if we think about it, we have a rough draft by Thursday. So that means everybody would have kind of their comments, edits in by Wednesday night or noon on Thursday, so that we could just, even if everybody's just kind of putting notes in there, we'll just have something to discuss on Thursday. But then we'd have revisions by Sunday, which is 4:30, and then finalized by 5/1. And I should say too, if anybody likes editing and doing that, you're more than welcome to take this on too. I just, for myself, I can't be up until midnight. I'm fine getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning and doing stuff, but not staying up late. And so and I think last year we did a great job of everybody met the timelines. Because it is tight and we know everybody's busy and working and has other obligations. And so with that, I don't know if we want to go around the room and just kind of maybe just get people's first reactions to the budget and kind of what they saw or didn't see, and maybe some kind of, we'll try to hone in on like themes or issues we see or things we want to bring to the board's attention.
Yeah. And then one question is like, the local level, we have a separate document for that, right?
We have a separate document, and usually it's
Very simple.
very,
It's-
very
You
perfunctory.
change three numbers and it's done.
It regurgitates language from previous years and just plugs in the most recent figures and
Which we have that report for you all.
And,
I've added it to the portal and then I'll.
Oh, you did?
I'll-
Okay. Okay.
and as I pointed out in previous meeting, the local option levy actually is not reporting on the current budget year that we're in, but on the last completed budget year, which was last school year. And
So 21, 22.
yeah, and so even though we're presenting it in 23.
Together.
And, and next year we'll be reporting on the 22, 23, so.
Yeah. And if you've uploaded those numbers, I can do the draft and have that for Thursday so everybody can look at it.
I'll email to you.
And that's a basic calculation as to what the average salary is of educators and support staff. Divided into the money that was raised by the levy and determining the number of positions are funded. And roughly it's about a third of what our teaching force is.
Okay, so I didn't want to do it.
No, that's okay. I'm just looking, okay, we had with 6:15.
Right, so your
So we
question
have
was.
an hour and 15. No, so, and I don't want to pressure anyone. If people want to talk out stuff too, that's fine. But just thinking about, like what. I don't know if you want to, I'm happy to, someone else can go first of like, what was kind of your first impressions or things that you didn't see answered or.
I think my big question was, just in my very not professional spreadsheet that I shared, I think, with everybody, and I put it on the questions page, was why it was looking like in the staffing allocations, the schools that served the kids with the greatest needs, their enrollments were going up, but their staffing levels were going down. And the opposite was true for the schools with the lowest needs on average. I do not understand that. I think it's partly coming from the instructional coaches being placed equally instead of equitably, and same with the ESSER funds. Every school gets $100,000, no matter how much money they can raise or what their needs are.
Did you feel that position observation that you made still held true after reviewing the staffing presentation that's in the document?
I don't think any of the numbers have changed, unless the numbers have changed.
Well, that's what I'm asking, whether you.
I haven't done a thorough
you
review to
looked at,
compare the number.
So
So
I
didn't include anything with OLA, so on my original assessment.
happen to get hammered regularly by sped teachers in Franklin, and so I happened to look at that figure, and I noticed that the formula has been adjusted for counselors or for
School psychologists.
psychiatrists,
Yeah.
based on school population rather than the population of sped students. So
Mhm.
so that I think that Franklin would argue for an increase in psychologists, but so I'm just asking. I don't know whether the staffing is modified in any way based on the information that was presented them there.
That might be part of it too. I mean, I think that the big changes I understand in staffing are every school's getting an instructional coach, and then the staffing formula changing for school psychologists. And that there are some schools that are no longer designated CSI, TSI, but they're kind of getting a buffer year, some more funds to help so they don't, the bottom doesn't completely drop out in terms of the supports for students in that bridge time.
And every school gets a SIG grant now, the school improvement grant. From 100 to 150,000, and which is a different approach. And I can remember years ago there were two high schools that got SIG grants at that time. Both were each $1 million. And that was to Roosevelt and to Madison, which is now McDaniel. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I did ask Jordan about is whether there is a summary of all the schools. So I don't know if anybody else, but the ratios and then having to go to each page, I was trying to see, is there a summary of all the schools and the positions?
That was the same question I asked you prior to our meeting. It was in previous budget presentations. It seems to be absent in this one, and I'm wondering whether that was a deliberate decision by the administration or just an oversight or.
But I do think that
Actually don't know, but
that
I would
kind of
figure it
helps,
out.
like, because I think I did the same. I looked at some schools and wondered, like Access was one that there was a significant increase in the budget. And I was trying to figure out why.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And kind of following the years of like, well, what was it that was added, or
It's
is
hard to
it?
track.
It's hard to
That
track
makes
and see why that would be different. So,
Well, I see all the schools in the school report. Is that
but
what
it's
you're
the
looking for?
ratios.
It's
It's
just
not, it
showing the
doesn't.
number of students who number of TE.
Yeah, it doesn't say like, okay, at Alliance, there's X number of teachers. It's
Oh,
just
right.
giving you a ratio.
Right. I think in the document that I used to do my analysis from, it did show increase or decrease of FTE, because that's how I was able to calculate that and make that observation that the schools with the highest needs were losing FTE even though their enrollment was going up
Okay.
and
So
vice
did you
versa.
put that in the
I did, yeah.
portal? Okay.
Yeah.
So where did you get that from?
It was from one of the, I'll have to backtrack. It was from one of the meetings that we had where we
Okay.
shared the staffing allocations.
Okay,
It was like the first
Okay.
staffing allocations.
okay.
Let's make sure.
And in previous years, there was a chart where you could see X number of dollars were being expended for students at Alliance, X number of dollars were being expended
Right.
on students at Roosevelt or any other school,
That's on this chart, the dollars per student is on this chart. It's in the
Yeah.
schools report.
It's
What
in,
page
it's
is
in. it's
In
on
here somewhere?
page,
Yeah.
4 and
I'm not
5
sure how to
in
look at
volume
that.
2.
Okay.
Yeah, so it tells you, kind of the history and then what it's proposed for this. Then whether, different programs at each. of the schools.
What's missing from this is, so we've got the ratio of students per FTE, but it doesn't show what the staffing allocation showed was the change in FTE and the change in student population.
So I have another issue, something to change with that kind of thing. Should I put my head in there for that then?
For like how to present staffing
Yeah, I think it's.
or.
I mean,
if
I think
you
we had
have
that discussion and I could write that, it's based on the discussion. that was doing.
Right, but the discussion is why, I guess it's the raising the question of why.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Ailey. I have a question just on what Grace was talking about. You guys may have already referenced this and I may have missed it, but we got a supplemental chart in the board budget. And it's called Achievement Students per FTE and Dollars per Students by School. And so it lays out the staffing ratios from 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23. And so it was a separate piece of paper that came with when we got our budget books delivered. So I don't know if you all also received that.
Well,
And
we
if not-
have one, Yeah, we
Yeah,
have
we have
one
that.
in there, but it's
Okay.
the total teachers per site.
I want to see.
The different, I'm trying to hold it up. It's a, I don't know if it's the same thing.
That one down, because I think that one.
The title of it is Achievement Students per FTE and Dollars per Student by School.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have that in our board book.
Okay. I think they just made a bigger one for us. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah,
Does yours have the total number of FTE? And total number of students? Not
It has
just
the it has the ratios. It doesn't have the totals.
okay.
Look at each.
A lot of it.
Well, that's what I did, like I started digging down, but then I thought, oh, there's a summary that just, you can see it, yeah.
It should be one separate.
Yeah.
Documents.
One, depending on what the. Yeah, those are like object. Yes.
my complaints of students is that sometimes they really rabid about climate issues and then they throw stuff away like that doesn't get recycled.
I think your question kind of alluded to, what PAT is recommending.
Which part? Yeah,
It's missing.
that we want hard caps.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out.
You can go to each individual.
Yeah, I see
Where
the individual schools.
Your part,
Mhm.
where does the
Yeah,
that come
trying to
in?
figure out what's happening in
Come in
each
to
or in.
interject.
And I thought, well, you could do the
Based
math,
off
but
This proposal, this is not aligning to what we're proposing.
I mean, I think that that's part of it, that, I mean, part of my concern and why I joined the committee was, I think that there needs to be more direct service, more priority on direct service than there has been.
What is this?
People, trained and caring adults working with children
People that give
Yeah.
us school sites,
at school sites,
as opposed to.
so much money on curriculum or paying curriculum companies to come and give us training.
So does a piece of what you're talking about, does that come from the school improvement plans that are allocated, the $100,000 that are allocated to?
From ESSER?
Yeah.
I don't think so, because that was a separate amount. What I'm looking at right now, it's in the,
Because it says it targets for like the professional development and targeted intervention for the students, and so, and then as I'm reading the section in the previous report for it, it sounds like in years past it wasn't shared externally either. But it sounds like there's some equity issues there in previous years and current and well, I shouldn't say, but in previous years. So my thoughts are like, I wonder if a piece of that comes from the direction of those principals and schools too, allocating it and probably like in not the most equitable ways, considering the report.
I don't think that they received ESSER grants prior to this year, unless, are you talking about a different kind of grant?
So the school improvement plans I'm talking about,
Okay.
yeah, because even in here, it talks about the, where is it? What's the name here? It's the school continuous improvement plan. And it sounds it sounds like there's almost a little bit of overlap there in regards to the goals for each of these two sections. So I'm on page 225 of the proposed budget, but then I'm also at on page 6, number 9 in the previous.
Yeah, and I think that number 9, if I remember correctly, is that it wasn't necessarily linked to a funding source, but it was that schools are required to put together these improvement plans every year. And they're not readily available to the community. So I think that's what.
each site council, at least the site council, tasked with developing a school improvement plan. And, or, that's what it used to be called it.
That's
I think they're they changed the name from school improvement plan. I can't think of what it is called.
Continuous improvement plan.
What's that?
Yeah, school continuous improvement.
Yeah,
plan.
it got modified. No, but essentially that's a task that site councils do. At least at Franklin. I don't know.
But then I think in this year's budget, they're specifically identified that each school is going to receive a school improvement grant. And they can choose
Yeah,
to use that.
that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, so but in this report, it talks about how $140,000 was invested via contract to basically like do almost like surveys and data collection around this. So it sounds like there's like almost like a more formalized pattern of the budget and not trying anything of like this kind of like direct service that you're talking about. Like there's like almost like a link between the two.
Some surveys are still ongoing and the district is still contracting with the same contract.
This is the successful school survey that we get every year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And every year there's grousing about how it's worded and all that kind of stuff. Anyway.
But I do think for the school improvement grants for this year that are in the budget, there's, I think one of my things was just, how are we accounting for the money spent? Or do the schools have to come up with a plan of how it's being spent?
And they do.
Okay.
Yeah, so they do, and it's up to the discretion of the principals with collaboration with their supervisors to be able to do that. And then there's like, if you spend over $75,000, it's this. If you spend under that, then these things happen. It's a little bit like, it's like kind of gray. So, and to have these target areas of like other non-FTE related support, FTE academic support, targeted intervention and professional development, those are some pretty key areas for this area to be a little bit gray in regards to distribution of those dollars.
And what page are you looking at?
So 225, just like that breaks down to that $100,000. And then 6, and I was also looking at page 6, number 9.
Haley, I see your hand is up. Haley? Your hand is up.
Oh, that was from earlier. I'm sorry.
Oh, you didn't mean to? Okay. Mariah, you're being quiet.
I'm here and listening in. Thank you.
Okay. Paz, did you have any comments?
I have a.
No, I'm just listening to everyone's input on things, and I do agree as far as how the money is being allocated, and I do believe too as far as more direct contact might be helpful, and maybe some other avenues that we haven't really looked at or looked into. That's what I'm listening to everybody and looking at the material that was given. So it's a lot, but I just think there's some other work we probably would need to do. And I know it takes time as far as the 4, areas that the board is working to achieve for the next fiscal year so far.
Paul, did you have a comment?
You missed the wrong. He does.
You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, similarly, so I'm new to the committee, so I'm just kind of soaking it in. I think that the questions that I have are much higher level and a little bit off topic compared to what you guys are, what the team is working on now. So I will, I'll hold those.
Okay, Karanja?
Yeah, I just want to build on what my two colleagues are mentioning on page 225. So where it says like all schools will receive 100,000 for the school improvement to spend down. I have a question. Does that align with the board goals? If the board goals is focused on equity and not equality, because those are two different types of terms, right? This is what I'm reading is equality, right? So it's equal amongst all schools. But correct me if I'm wrong, it's to my understanding that the board goals is more so directed towards equity. And equity is different. So equity will be more so, more money will go towards the higher need schools. And less money will go to the, to the schools that don't have as much need. That is more so equity.
Maybe Ailey can answer that. My understanding is, when the board was discussing that they wanted to establish a threshold for all schools and then and build upon it. That's why some schools will only receive 100,000, others would go all the way up to 150 or whatever it is. But maybe that's a misunderstanding. So Ailey, do you want to comment about that?
So this is about the ESSER grants. Is that what you're asking about, Mr. Cruz?
Yes.
Yeah, so the ESSER grants, my understanding is they were 100,000 and schools were to write, how these would fit in with their improvement plans. And that's all I know at this point. I don't have a depth of knowledge on how those, other than that was the goal, is to use that ESSER money and to sort of work with the individual leadership of each site to say, what is it that you see that's the most urgent need in your community to meet your goals?
Yeah, my question is.
Yeah, and I think your point about equity versus equality there, right? Every school got the same regardless of size or regardless of sort of poverty levels or student needs or student outcomes. And this is an experimental pilot to see what does this do and to look at, some of it is being responsive to our community saying, we know our schools best. And so we want to have some choices and options. And we did not look at it through the equity formula. You'll have some schools got more and some schools got less, because we were trying to make sure every school got enough to fund a position for what their community felt they needed. And so that's a great question to ask, though, about how the equity and equality conversation intersects with that ESSER grant program. And especially as we're talking about potentially continuing that in the future with levy dollars, it's a good thing to have in our minds. So I don't have an answer, but I think it's an excellent question.
So it looks like the schools that have some more students do get a little bit more money, $11 per student. But I think there needs to be some transparency in this, and maybe we can make comments in here about this, because even like with a participatory like budgeting viewpoint, including your community, being transparent with your community, the parents and folks within the school about how, I think applying that lens of equity and transparency will then allow for better use of the funds if it's actually visible for those to see how it's going to be used. But I think if we kind of keep it behind closed doors, I mean, I know principals need to do what they need to do for their schools, but we need to have a layer of transparency in that process.
And I would just to put it out there on the record, we know that the pandemic impacted communities in different ways. Mm-hmm. And especially our communities of color were hit real hard. So why are we giving ESSER money that was supposed to be pandemic relief equally to all schools?
That sounds like an observation.
Yeah.
Try to take notes on that, but also, if any, I haven't given you all access to editing the working report document yet, because I want they need to get messed up. But if anyone wants to go in there and actually start writing stuff down.
I copied it off,
Oh, okay.
just so I wasn't messing it up.
I don't want to miss any of your notes.
Notes.
While they're plugging stuff in, that's totally cool.
And Jordan, I just shared with you the information that shows change in FTE and change in enrollment.
Oh, great. Thank you.
It's from a memo to the board, March 15th from Dr. Adams. So if you want to share that with everybody.
Yeah.
And I don't know if those numbers have been updated recently. I know when I asked about the OLA projected enrollment, they said that that was a typo, that they didn't project 458 students, but that's what's on there.
Oh, I remember that question. Yeah.
So there might be other numbers that are not correct either.
Yeah, that's, I think I'll ask them to.
But that's where, that's what I was working off of when I kind of did my little chart
So maybe we should
showing,
do that.
why are these schools getting more and they're growing, not growing as
Right.
quickly?
That makes sense. I almost wonder if I should ask it. Sure.
I would say my observation is the board is evolving as their attitudes are on this subject. But my recollection is that what is reflected in this document was first proposed by Director Hollins. I could have been mistaken, but as one who attends board meetings and so on, that's my recollection of that discussion.
In the whole budget?
I think he proposed it at a work session. You're right, Roger. I think that was Gary's idea.
Yeah.
What, the 100,000 equally?
Yeah, a threshold amount to every school and so
We
on.
believe you are correct.
But that may change, or may be changing, I don't know.
And there's like this little, like this clause is a little, is worded in an interesting way with this section 75. FTE use or cannot use, so they can't use it. They can't use it towards FTE if they use over 75,000 the local school foundation resources, and then if they use less than that, then they can use it towards FTE. And of course, schools that are struggling are most likely going to then use it. They're going to need to use more money.
The local school foundations, though, that's not the ESSER dollars.
Okay.
That's like auction money. That's parents donating money to the school,
So
which is not equity.
yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like it's like the local. So yeah, exactly. So if they're using more than 75, like they're already getting those funds. It just sounds really muddy.
I was wondering if y'all looked at the proposed budget presentation that's prepared for the front budget meeting. There's a slide that might be helpful around the ESSER funded school improvement grants. It's on board books.
I have it on the portal too, but
Yeah,
I can email it to you.
I mean, it breaks down what the FTE school leaders elected to fund with the ESSER grants.
Where
And
is it?
so we see that it's,
Can you direct us to the page, Jordan, or is it not in the book?
She's talking about the presentation slide deck,
Okay.
which I have on the portal right now.
I see.
On the front
Okay.
page. It's called April 25.
I have an overall question. The superintendent's message says he's presenting a proposed budget of 9.9. Is basing his proposal on a $9.9 billion biennial budget, and that's below what the governor has recommended, and is very much below the governor is proposing 9.5 and the co-chairs are 9.3, as I recall. And so if the board is adopting a budget, let's say they adopt a proposed budget finally at 9.9, and the legislature appropriates something less than that, does that mean we're in an amendment process the 1st of July? Holy criminy. Why go through this exercise?
the timing is challenging. And so, you know, what that's saying is that we're modeling our revenues over the 9.9. That's what's included in the financial modeling in the budget. But as more information is available during the budget process, that can.
So every figure that's presented to us in this document will be cut in some portion.
It could be. I mean,
Well,
it's,
what do you mean? Otherwise, you're drawing more out of reserves or something like that?
it could be, I mean, it would be just be the choice around how they balance the budget given the revenue.
I don't know. I don't know that we have enough in reserves even if we were to authorize drawing it down to zero. Beaverton did that a number of years ago, and then they laid off 340 teachers the next year because the state didn't come up with the additional revenue and so on. So,
Does the same question apply to the local levy? So local levy fund based on projections and if that is improved, or is that already what you said?
The local option levy is also based, it's a property tax and it's also based on projections.
Okay, and that is 5%. Sure.
See what,
I think it was fine. Yeah, I think these are all risks. I would call them risks because risks,
yeah,
that's risk versus kind of maybe.
well, that's a fairly big risk as far as I'm concerned.
Both risks and factors. To point out.
I'm
I feel like this is something that we brought up in the, when we first started talking about this too, that kind of
Mhm.
long-term,
Mhm.
kind of like.
I realize that 9.9 is more the estimate of what school districts came up with, what is maintenance of effort, or use of term that was once applied as Fed funding and so on. I sincerely doubt that if you've got a governor that's proposing 9.5 and the co-chair are 9.3, that 600 million is
It's not a conservative way to set the budget, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, of course, there's this level of uncertainty there, right? But you should, it's above what you can figure with the estimates.
I understand that budgets are a target and that they can always be amended and changed and so on, and they are, but that's considerable gap.
Can I ask, I think it's related perhaps to what you were saying about the funding gap. It's like, I noticed on the 3-year forecast that the budget goes down quite a bit. Is that just some sort of like a mechanical thing, or is that an actual projection?
are you looking at
Page
the
27, page 27, and then you have the proposed budget every year for. Yeah, and so it goes down from 2.17 this year to 1.6 2026.
I mean, what would that be based on enrollment projections?
yeah.
Just purely? It's not-
It's not true, that's a 25% reduction. It's that you're going to have a 25% reduction. You know, I mean, you have to have a higher than 25% reduction in order to get that. I've already.
So this is for all funds, and so it included capital projects and capital projects.
Okay, so it's kind of the project.
43% from last year, and so we see that driving a lot of
Okay.
the year-over-year changes.
And then I noticed when it came to the, I don't know, I don't know where it was, but I noticed when there was some budget by line item by teaching salary, and the teaching didn't increase a lot. And I thought it was just for this, but I think it was when so this one over license salaries, this one. Which one of those is the direct, what do you call it?
Direct services.
Direct service. Which one of these would map to the direct services?
Which page are you on?
27.
Well, it could be more than one.
Right, but which ones are? I mean, not all, but it's license salary.
Any license classified, there are not represented staff. in
Okay,
Schools.
so- So if you look, I didn't do the exact numbers, but if you look at those, the increase here from 23 to 2026 there's a small increase here, but it's less than 3% over a 3-year period, which means that there is not going to be an increase in staff. If there is a cost of living adjustment in any kind of way, then it's probably going to result in a reduction in staff. So if I think that's something to mindful about.
So some of these are, I mean, you said it's about a 3.5% growth increase that we calculate for these forecasts. Year over year for some of them, but for others, we have other inputs that are informing the forecast. So if you look at the capital projects for debt service, we have other forecasts and financial modeling that are.
Yes, I just, I'm doing this very quickly, but like 5%. So there's a 5% between 20, so it's a 3-year 5%. That's not a 3% of the license salary. So that's the biggest item there. And then like, I mean, we probably are going to have a much higher increase in salaries this year because of inflation. So like you can kind of guess from these estimates that the number of FTE is going to decline over that period without budget. Because if you have the same, if you keep the budget, if you keep the number of FTE the same, right, you have to have a higher increase in that line number in order to accommodate loss, like a higher, like a cost of living that's like reasonable at this.
But isn't it reasonable to expect that if you have declining enrollments, you have fewer?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I think it's probably fine here, like, I just I can't quite understand how that kind of pencils out in terms of the FTE. I just want to raise, it's an observation I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It depends a lot on the enrollment change and how that then pencils into all of that.
And I think it brings us back then to how the FTEs are then allocated to each school, and it's not going to be that.
And also towards like what kind of
Yeah.
FTE, right?
Yeah.
Is it like, is it the teacher gap, where do you adjust?
Paul, I just realized you have a message in the chat. Did you want to ask a question?
Sure. I'm off mute this time. Yeah, so on the ESSER fund, specifically the portion that's going toward the education coaches. So my understanding of the ESSER funds and the grants is that it's a 1-year thing. So is that expected to just be a 1-year funding for those positions, and then either the positions are cut or funded by another method? I guess what's the long-term intent with those, given that they're being funded by temporary dollars?
Well, that's the very question that was posed in the Q&A.
Okay.
Doc, and I don't know that the district has adequately responded to that. And we seem to express within the committee at that time that there's great concern of using one-time funds for ongoing expenditures. And so what is the district's plan for meeting those ongoing responsibilities if they're going to use ESSER funds for this purpose this go around?
I think I posed the question too, I think in the Q&A early on about the student investment account and like how that we were like, it was described to us that it's based on market and some very many different factors. And I think Roger, you also presented at a separate meeting about like just the upcoming possible like, or even just in general, like the volatility of the market and how that was we banked on that last time. We're banking on these one-time funds this time. And it just sounds like it's like almost like Robin Hood or baseball every single time. So there's I guess I haven't seen like a long-term sustainability plan I can get behind and feel confident in. So yeah.
I don't know what page it is, but there's a chart that shows that where we banked that their enrollments would go back up after COVID and so on, and it didn't happen. And we were, I can remember the deputy superintendent that presented that at that time, and we bought it, and then we all got caught with our proverbial down, and so I'm really very concerned that we're doing the same thing, and I can tell you which constituencies that I would expect that will be banging the drum loud and hard to continue that funding somehow, and so best we identify where that's coming from in the future, or maybe we don't do this at all. And then, the superintendent's back to the drawing board.
Did you see that? I just wanted to. Yeah, to solve all the problems. Did you foresee that comment being a part of the observations? The noticing that it just seems like the can's always being kicked down the road or.
I think it's more, I think we're beyond the observation. I think the observation has been being made for a bit and the pattern is showing that each time we go around like that, this is happening. It's another, I mean, unless that is the norm, that's like.
I think that's not the idea.
Then it's,
not even know.
yeah, so I think that it is. There needs to be somebody, these are, I mean, for me, these are not numbers, these are people. Like, and so these people, these are kids, jobs.
Right.
Yeah, and so I think we think through that a little bit more. And then that may look like some of the questions that we've been asking that haven't been, when it's perceived that we're getting too into the weeds, those might be the questions that we want to keep asking about. So as for observation or recommendation, I think I can't, even for myself, I can't even say recommendation because I'm not sure what a possible solution could be without creating more work in less than a week.
Solution is we get funded to the quality education model.
Oh, good luck.
Well, you could put that early.
Yeah.
I have to
I
say,
don't think anybody on the board would disagree with that one.
this is the first year within my knowledge since the QEM was adopted by the legislature way back in the early 2000s. The PAT has been in Salem lobbying for funding of the QEM. There has never been a governor proposing funding at QEM level, and it's never been achieved. And right now the gap is like 2 billion or better below. And often in behalf of educators, since the funding source was transferred to the state by ballot measure 5 and then subsequent ballot measure 7, and the state was never given any funding source. And notwithstanding that the sponsors of ballot measure 5 said, oh, it wouldn't affect education. It did, and there were cuts for over 20 years. And we're trying to achieve certain things in our budget here that require the allocation of additional resources to achieve them. And by, for example, providing more resources to Title I, to the other SAI schools, TSI, CSI, and that becomes exceedingly difficult. And when you want to address classroom sizes and that kind of stuff, and deal with the resources that you're provided from the state. So, because it's still based on the average state membership. So. And from the legislators' point of view, they follow hook, line, and sinker what the legislative fiscal office provides them, and their analysts always come in low ball from what school district is. So I'm keeping an eye on the clock over there, and before Lisa raises her hand and says, "Hey, you're going overtime here," Are we willing to break out some assignments as to drafting on various subjects? We heard one down here about third grade reading, board goal. How about the other board goals?
Can I just make a question about this?
Okay.
So, did anyone in the budget actually see the third grade reading goal or any of the qualitative goals being stated?
Where they state their goals in the budget.
Oh, they state the goals, yes, yeah, this is the goals thing. But so we had these conversations around like these different backgrounds by goals, right? And not qualitative goals, if I remember correctly, right? The ones who sort of like, we wanna improve
Third grade reading.
third grade reading by
math.
X.
Yeah.
But I couldn't find that in the budget, and I was just wondering.
I think it would be a matter of us interpreting how the
This
money is
one.
spent.
This
Yeah.
one is the goal, it's like.
So we have the strategic plan and then very close to where you are just talking about, we have the board goals listed. And I think we just link to the electronic version of the board goal document. So I think they're just summarized in bullet points. It might.
I see it on page 17.
17, you say?
Yep.
Oh, but it doesn't say what they are. It just says third grade reading.
Right. It doesn't say what the target numbers are.
Yes.
On the PDF that Jordan sent out, there's actually a link to the PPS board adopted goals for the years 2022 through 2027. And that's much more in depth. It does actually say percentage points per year of growth. So I found that to be really helpful. Thanks, Jordan.
Was that from the PDF on the board book or the budget book? Sorry.
Yeah, the 2023-24 proposed volume 1 PDF, and it's the page labeled page 11. It's page 12 of the PDF or 19 of 29, depending on how you look at it.
I just want to make sure we're talking about these goals. It's like, that's the goal. It's like the actual like.
It's the one,
Roger, you should.
it's in the portal.
You should proceed with
Volume 1.
I just want to make sure that's actually.
Can we just go, does anybody else have other kind of
Karanja, did you have
additional
a
observations?
subject area you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, my only thing is, that's stated in the letter, the MAPS assessment is not aligned with the board goals. You can even see in the portal, they didn't really answer the question. They didn't answer the question with Dr. Adams in our presentation. But, so I would recommend, finding other assessment models to measure student growth. For example, MAPS is considered a norm reference test, so it's like comparing apples with oranges. So if our board goals is proficiency based and we are looking to see growth in proficiency scores, then we should stick with those type of assessments to measure proficiency growth. And then not based off of growth from just a standardized test, but instruction is not being administered that is being assessed.
I have a formatting suggestion. So we talked about in the beginning before we jump into people years, that kind of like bullet points. So perhaps like during these underneath the paragraphs, it's like you could say like a bullet point for, like for the strategic plan, like write what this which ones this particular section covers, like for the strategic plan and the goals, like linking them together. So for example, I'll just pick like, if it was number 8, I'm not gonna say what's in it, but then we would say like third grade reading that this bill covers, and then also like racial equity and inclusive of differentiated learning, professional development, but then we'll leave embracing change because we noticed that one in our review of whatever we're reviewing, that it didn't include that specific area. So they can actually see where they might have missed the particular mark in covering the strategic plan and their actual goals. And so we can figure out like how to either you include it or you leave it out, but I think it would be good to see where the gap actually is from that overview that you talked about in the beginning to, it would be helpful. Okay, and then for our closing remarks, that, or somewhere in here, I think we should talk about that, the larger issue we're having with these one-time funds somewhere in here as well. So
If I'm remembering correctly, and help me if I'm not, the instructional coaches was part of the SIA, not the ESSER, right? Because I remember the ESSER was the learning acceleration specialists, the 20 people that really target our Black and Native students who need support and work directly with them. And that was one time. And I remember having a problem with like, why isn't that part of the SIA money that is offered every year from the city? But the instructional coaches were SIA instead of, so they're not one time.
Yeah, they're consistent.
Is it listed on that document they presented on that
Yeah, I was trying to find it. I couldn't find it,
session?
but I'm pretty sure that's what it was, that the instructional coaches were SIA and every school got one, no matter need, no matter size, no matter enrollment.
My other recommendation would be, are reviewing the ESSER dollars from equity needs and not quality.
That you're talking about the 100,000? Did we cover that in the board work session?
Yes.
Okay.
What's that?
Well, asking if that presentation was in.
Might have been.
Yeah, that's what I say.
yeah. So currently we're saying what sections that we want.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So,
We're going by topic or what?
I think we can go number by number, we can go by issues that I think kind of what people raised tonight, what people have an interest in. And some of these we could look at some in here and say, well, this doesn't apply this year too. That
Yeah, I think that's isn't that how you all started last year?
Yeah.
That was a helpful meeting.
Mariah, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, can I ask if we can also, in the last budget letter gets this bit, include some positive indicators in there as part of our observations. Like for instance, with the ESSER funds, it seemed like potentially some of the growth in the MAPS growth, the growth that was demonstrated through the MAPS score, I don't know if it's correlated, but it's a positive indicator, right? So we can call these out and ask for, perhaps clarification around this, or if there's correlation or, other things like that. But I would like to call out some positive indicators as well as the things that we don't have enough data on or we would like more on.
I like that suggestion.
So what are some positive indicators?
Yes,
What are the positive indicators?
well, as she was mentioning, go ahead.
Because MAPS is not a positive indicator.
Well, what I'm suggesting is that for underrepresented students, the growth demonstrated there in this past year, and again, I fully acknowledge it's 2 years, right? It's not a trend. It's 2 years, but that seems like it could be a positive indicator, and we'd like to know more. you
But
know,
yeah.
other things like where there has been a focus in equity funding for schools, like let's call that out. Let's call the things out that we do care for as well.
Yeah, I agree, but MAPS is not a positive indicator because, as I stated before, the instruction is not aligned with what is being assessed. So it's not a positive indicator.
So what you're saying is like you might see an improvement on the map, but it doesn't mean it necessarily translates into improvement in the actual assessment. But
Just overall, just proficiency in students, academic growth.
Well, perhaps there are other areas too where the budget seems to be responsive or to the board goals in terms of professional development. Are we seeing that alignment there?
And I'm pretty sure you all had a couple of positives last year, right?
Yeah, we acknowledged it. I think when we drafted, I think we can kind of like sandwich it. So I think that's more of like a formatting issue, but I feel like fine. Thanks in here that.
Yeah, because I think we did talk about staffing and there were some positive improvements, but also, and actually that was one thing I wanted to see because we don't have any kind of evaluation of, you know, what is being done to enhance the workforce, to identify, I guess it's just, there's some things in there, again, like I think we could state positives, but just kind of reinforce that there's still work to be done.
I found reading the superintendent's message, he cites some positive things there that might bear amplification.
but you're there.
So, question, I was just asking this on the side, but I haven't seen too much on like, in regards to transportation, and is that something that is completely separate? Or, is that something that we could bring up as well in here?
What kind of transportation are you?
So like school transportation or
Buses.
busing, because it's significantly reduced, some schools don't.
I
get
saw
any besides-
$550, $550 for electronic bus, for the electronic bus project on page 133.
Electronic bus project,
Yes.
I mean, some of that's
That's more
wrapped
than
into,
half
I think,
million.
like climate action.
okay,
So happening over a period of time.
yeah, that's what I was asking, so I was like, I don't know if I'm overlooking it or.
But I feel like that's a lot for us, for buses, like $500,000. But
It's a
compared
big
to,
district.
Well, the down things are expensive. I mean, you're $500,000 probably buys 2 or 3 buses.
Mhm.
And
Even an old used one.
yeah,
How many kids will it serve?
That's a good
you know,
question.
one of the criticisms you hear about Portland Public Schools is that it doesn't have its own fleet of buses. It contracts out for largely with First Student or whatever the name of the bus they own the sped buses and there's some other limited buses that are used for field trips and stuff like that. But and high schoolers get a TriMet bus pass and so on, and because the metropolitan area is served by public transportation, either MAX or buses and or light rail, and so that's the way Portland Public deals with its transportation needs. There are outlying districts, as you are well aware, if you live on the east side, you see David Douglas buses all over everywhere. Reynolds is the same way. Gresham schools are that way, but no, they're not. Okay.
Yeah, and I just ask it like now my like PBS parent perspective, childhood does not get busing.
Oh, no, yeah,
Yeah,
you're
like-
waiting for the bus, you know, so.
Yeah, we're just no busing at all.
What's
So,
the program?
she's at the bench.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, yeah. No bus. Yeah, 0.
For them, 12.
That's it, yeah. But I think, so we should probably just jump into, so I don't mind helping with like closing remarks. Kind of, I think that's a strong point of mine of like summarizing. And if there's any work being done on that SCIP recommendation, I'd like to participate in that.
Oh, yeah.
That's under the ESSER.
Leaving us.
Allocation.
One thing, Lisa, when you create your document, put CBRC in the title so it's easily searched or so it's found, you know. And so I recently had a conversation with Jordan. He sent me a couple of things and didn't include CBRC, and I was searching for it. And so then I searched under Jordan's name and found it. And
Yeah.
so, you know, there's just certain shortcuts that one uses.
Okay, yeah. I'll make sure to highlight it in the
Okay,
title.
whatever, just put it, plug in.
You got, you just put it through the Roger
CBRC
lens.
draft document,
Big bold,
whatever.
big bold.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, Roger, pay attention.
Yeah. I'm interested in the doing the observation and the recommendation for portions pertaining to student success act and student investment account. I'm familiar with as a help.
Paul, did you have any druthers?
I'm happy to volunteer for any of the sections where you think I might be useful.
Okay.
I can do on the first grade assessment, but generally the goals involved. I think the one thing the general comment I made on the budget outlooks for next few years, I can do that, be part of that. And I also would like to be, perhaps, if you talk a little bit about this document. I have 1 or 2 thoughts I could share with them. I don't know if that's a separate one to say. It's more about some sort of how you present that and how you make sure that funds are actually going to the schools they should go. I think that's kind of what you're talking about. A comment about the local levy, but I think that leave it out.
Well, yeah.
No, I think in the interest of time, I just.
Okay. Well, personally, as I stated, I'll be glad to make some comments about the Q&A thing, and I'll use my editing skills to check your punctuation and your spelling and that kind of stuff. That's what my career background is. Want this report to be yours.
Roger, did you want to take pieces? Do you want to review? Do you want to?
Is that it?
Gotta think of another option. You can do any of the above. You can,
Okay.
if there's things that you want to highlight that, and so everyone's gonna have access to this document.
Yeah.
So we'll track who's adding and I think just for Thursday, what I would suggest is that everybody, we're not gonna do any editing and we're just gonna have people fill in their pieces. And, yeah, and I think for Thursday, I wouldn't even attempt to do any editing because I think it'll help people flesh out ideas and thoughts and concerns and where people are raising issues. So it could just be, people kind of expressed areas they have an interest in. So it could just be that as part of that, you can go in and add where you feel you want to comment.
So we just made recommendations and suggestions.
Yeah, and it could be, some of this, like we said, some of these are gonna drop off if we just don't find them relevant for this year. And some of it could be, we're gonna add new observations and new recommendations. It sounds like we do have some here. So, I think it'll just be, people can put those in and then we'll kind of work from there.
I got one more clarification question. Looking at the school budget reports, actually my two children noticed this actually when they were looking at it. Is there a formula on the allocations of dollars that go to schools? Like, for example, Lincoln has 13 million, but Jefferson has 7 million. And then you find it throughout like the different middle schools and elementary schools. The schools with the higher needs had less overall funding than the schools that did not have high need. So I was just wondering, is there like a formula that the district is using for those allocations, or is there a policy that they're being governed by on these allocations? I'm just curious.
I know there is one.
I'm curious as to
Wait.
what you're referring to, because it's
Like, for example, if you look at, okay, we can look at IW Wells. So page 85, 13 million. But then if you look at Jefferson High School, it was only 7 million.
Part of that's gonna be enrollment.
Yeah.
how about the
Okay.
enrollment?
Yeah,
Apples
Okay.
and-
okay. So it's the enrollment.
For the, I think for Jefferson it would be, but I don't know. You know, so there.
Yeah, because it'd
Because it's
be
like
Jefferson's,
In the document, is there a place where it talks about the staffing formula? Because I know that it's weighted.
Yeah.
Where would we find that?
On one of the educational section,
Okay.
it has the Delano, it's the staffing, formula details. And then around the comment on the overall dollars, it's true that it's a lot about the enrollment at that school, and it could also be the mix of funding at the school, like foundation.
So that's the inequity we were talking about.
So that would be a factor there, and a helpful way to compare across schools would be looking at the dollars per student. So if you look at what we call that heat map, the really colorful
This one.
red, green, yeah, so this is kind of summer, right?
What book is that?
That's
This
the
is in the
student
slim volume, the volume,
towards the front.
page 4 to 5.
Let me see the cover.
This is one.
And
I
that's
think
the
it's the
one
one, the
that,
school report.
that totals the dollars per student.
So this is trying to offer a good way to compare across the schools, and so it's when it has the ratio of students to FTE.
Oh,
So it doesn't actually have that amount of FTE. You have to look at the individual school reports, but it's suggesting a ratio to help you compare the different schools. And then the dollars per student is also helping compare. And they're grouped. So if you compare high schools, that might be a more meaningful way to compare the difference. So high schools are listed first, and then we have 6 through 8, K through 8, and 5.
And Karanja, you were citing two schools, just to give me an example there that says Lincoln is receiving $8,681 per student. And we're at the right.
Yeah, just to the good breakdown.
And you compare that with Jeff is at 12,252. And even though it has a much lower enrollment than does Lincoln. And the two high schools that with the largest enrollments are still Grant and Franklin. And they've been over enrolled ever since they were remodeled. And
Alliance is 20, what is Alliance?
and I happen to focus in on the charge that is given the Bond Accountability Committee, and one of them is maintaining the schools and so on. And I can tell you that there were 2 pages of shortcomings that were being submitted by Franklin when the district signed off on the construction of the building. And there's been projects pending at Franklin ever since. And that happens because I volunteer there, but
Because your favorite people on there.
Oh, gotcha. I'm biased, but question, just a side note, as I'm going through this. We got a letter this year from the CBOs, right?
Yeah.
Or was that for last year? Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember if I was getting,
Yeah.
like, okay, just making sure.
It's on the portal, I can send it to you again.
That's where I saw it. No, you're good. I was making sure that I wasn't completing it.
Usually, yeah, I think maybe 3 separate letters.
Oh, they're all set, okay.
And I'm gonna say, one of the areas that is the most volatile is Native American. For example, I happen to notice this year, they're projected that Franklin has 0. In previous years, back when I was PTSA president, one year we had 8 students. Another year we only had 6 or something like that. One year we graduated the full cohort, and the other year we had 4 that didn't pass with their cohort, and boy, that through the statistics of all cattywampus that particular year as the graduation rate. And due to a very small number, but nevertheless,
Well, they also don't count people properly,
yeah,
but that's a whole,
yeah.
so. So perhaps it might be easier for us to assign the categories or areas that people might want to work in by breaking the document down, and it's like general areas. So like for this one, I'm gathering that it's about enrollment. This one, our RESJ could most likely be broken out separately from CDO because most CDOs are worked by folks of color, so it's kind of like so we might want to separate those two, like this area for three on page 3, that's like academic recovery. Then we have staffing, then we have a category for one-time funding, then there's central services, then I pulled out MAP. So if we kind of break it out like that, then I think we're also having an easier read, but also then it's easier for us to pick the categories and participate.
Steve, you're ready to write the whole report?
I'm ready to draft my parts. I got my topics, so I'm ready. I don't know what I want to
So you all are gonna start editing the working report. So should I give you all editing notes?
Is this the one you're talking about, the draft BRC report, this one?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And I'd say if you add an observation or recommendation, you might want to just put your name in parentheses next to it, just so we know.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful.
We don't have to leave it in there at the end, but
No,
I think while we're working.
But you at least know where it's coming from.
Which would be, well, one, just people put their names by the numbers, but also if you use the tracking, it'll show us who
Yeah.
wrote. Is that what you mean? Or you think anytime someone adds something, they should put their initials?
Yeah, I think
by it?
just like, just putting a stamp there that says this is my area that I'm working on this one.
Okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. Like
Yeah.
as you're in there editing, just
Yeah.
kind of make it so that you're, okay.
It's that time of night.
Every time. It really is the way
Is
to-
it actually?
It's like the library, right?
Yeah, it automatically turns off and it's
For programming.
energy saving.
I can tell you, there have been some years where we sat here for 10 or 15 minutes waiting for the darn thing to come back on.
That's fine.
Okay, I'm gonna just give everyone access.
And staff wandering through the building, find the switch.
And then I'll start just looking at some of the kind of the introduction and some other things to update it for this year as just kind of overriding and make some of the changes you had mentioned about just kind of the formatting and how we present it.
Steve, I'm concerned that,
Sound like you.
is your
review and-
concern about the local option levy report
Great.
uh, germane to its drafting?
I think I might just make it and recommend it there. So it's just, maybe if you have time, we can discuss it. I don't think it's super central to this. I think I wanna make sure that we get through the whole concept that in this.
Well, we do have to do both at the same time. So it's
Mariah, Paul, Taz, do you have anything that you're confused about or anything you want to add?
No, I just popped in chat though that I have an interest in kind of taking a lens and looking at these school-based supports in terms of, particularly our reading and math goals. So I'll give a read on that. And I think like Roger, I'm interested in talking about the growing facilities liability and calling attention to that, and especially in light of the projected enrollment declines from this report. It was pretty shocking to me actually. What the enrollment declines are projected to be at some schools.
Yeah. The liability, where is that highlighted? No. So pages or section? Anyone? The liability issue. Where is that highlighted?
It was in the document on Q&A, but where I asked what
That was one of
the
your
cumulative liability was. Last year, we were reported it was 600 million. This year, we're told it's in excess of $1 billion. So if we're increasing by 400 million a year, we're at a perilous, in my judgment, we're no longer keeping faith with the voters and telling, we're maintaining even the buildings that we are modernizing.
Is there any like projection for that liability or next 5 years?
Well, not that I find satisfactory, is they say, they select priorities and that kind of stuff. And well, what are the priorities? If you're growing at 400 million a year, something is, there's not a very high priority apparently.
Roger, do we know that that's a year-over-year growth? I mean, in terms of like, is there some kind of accounting or how we got 400 million? Because I'm guessing it didn't jump 400 million the past 3 years in a row, right?
I don't know how the chief of operations came to that figure, but
It's worth asking.
Specifically, I posed that we were told that we were 600 million last year. And this year, I'm told it's in excess of 1 billion. And also, and another question I asked of how many buildings the district operated in, and was told 200, which included portables. And I noticed the superintendent in his summary message that refers to 300 schools. So I know something's wrong.
Yeah, we should know how many.
Yeah.
We should know how many.
And heretofore,
Get out of here.
my memory was they had to go back that way the last time.
Where does it say that, Roger?
What's that? Oh, the 300?
Yeah.
It's in his summary message.
Gravity is not.
Superintendent budget message.
Oh, really? Such a good music too. I mean, it's like top notch. I can.
Can you search the number? Okay.
I just had a feeling like happens 300 and it's 1,000.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I think it possible should.
Yeah, number of buildings. that-
Maybe close the meeting, right?
Yeah, I guess so. We are adjourned.